Hello everyone, I am the Benedict Kirby. Welcome to my channel, The Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck techs. On this episode of The Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a commander from Jurassic Park, Indominus Rex Alpha. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel at no extra cost to you. But the very best way you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. There are plenty of perks for being a patron, such as early access to certain videos, exclusive deck techs, gifts, and more for as little as $1. You can also become a channel member for just 99 cents. Show off your support with a logo next to your name and exclusive emojis. Or you can always support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. I put out a video every Monday, so you don't want to miss out. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Rex is a 6/6 dinosaur mutant for 1 generic, 2 blue-black hybrid, and 2 green. It has 2 abilities. One happens as it enters the battlefield, meaning that it's before it enters the battlefield. As it does, you can discard any number of creature cards. It'll then enter with a keyword counter on it for each keyword those creatures had. The important thing about this ability is that it can't be situation keywords like first strike when attacking or paying to give it death touch, etc. It has to be the keyword independently from anything else. If you look at the list, we're getting haste counters for the first time in this micro set. However, while we're getting haste counters as of the making of this video, we've yet to have a creature in this color identity combination with double strike. So if you're using this as your commander, you won't be able to give it a double strike counter on its own. That being said, the keyword soup is magnificent. Its second ability is a triggered ability that happens when it actually enters the battlefield. When it does, you draw a card for each counter on it. Notice that it's not worded as a type of counter. So if it entered with 10 +1/+1 counters, you draw 10 cards. If it entered with multiple of the same type of keyword counter, you draw a card for all of them. So not only will this be a game-ending beater, but it'll also keep your hand full. Before getting to the spicy tech of the deck, let's get the counters out of the way, since that is at the core of the deck's main strategy. We want to get as many of those keyword counters on it as possible. Let's start with the single counter sorcerers: Forge of Heroes, Guildmage's Forum, Llanowar Reborn, and Oran Reef the Fastwood. All of these being lands means they don't take up spell slots in the deck. They're also all relatively free sources of giving our commander a +1/+1 counter when it enters the battlefield. What we do is, in response to its ETB trigger, we activate the lands to give it a +1/+1 counter. Then when its trigger resolves, it'll see that counter and count it for drawing cards. Guildmage's Forum doesn't require this stack manipulation, since it'll give the +1/+1 counter for using the mana of its special ability to cast it, same with Llanowar Reborn giving the counter when the creature enters the battlefield. Minas Morgul Dark Fortress is another one of these lands, but this one is spicier because it gives a shadow counter, and is currently the only source of shadow counters in the game. Same as before, in response to our commander's ETB trigger, we activate this to put a shadow counter on it. This might seem a bit pricey since it requires 4 mana and tapping to activate, so this might be better in the later game when we have a ton of mana and might have to cast Indominus Rex. However, on its own, it's still amazing because giving our commander Shadow is essentially making it unblockable, all for just 1 activation, unlike something like Rogue's Passage, which requires 4 mana and tapping each time. However, that being said, Rogue's Passage is still included because redundancy. While these lands might not seem impressive as sources of counters, let's move on to the creatures that give 2 keyword counters. Basara Tower Archer, Beltol Dragon, Carnage Tyrant, and Silumgar the Drifting Death is the subgroup that gives both hexproof and an extra keyword counter. Hexproof is a very important keyword counter since this is a Voltron deck, but we can still make the most of it and give it an extra keyword like Flying, Reach, or Trample. Another crucial keyword is Indestructible. Thanks to Bontu the Glorified, Kefnet the Mindful, Ronus the Indomitable, Stonehoof Chieftain, Darksteel Sentinel, Darksteel Gargoyle, Darksteel Colossus, and Blightsteel Colossus, we not only get Indestructible but an extra keyword as well, whether it's Menace, Vigilance, Flying, etc. With so many options, we can realistically have one of these in hand when casting or getting our commander onto the battlefield. Try not to discard them all, since we always want a source of indestructibility and or hexproof like before. As a bonus, the last 2 shuffle themselves into our library instead of hitting the graveyard, so we can eventually redraw into them. Now, while these are the best creatures because they give indestructible, I'd be remiss if we didn't want to really soup up our commander. So let's look at the creatures that give 3 keyword counters. Gurmag Swiftwing and Miri the Curse both give Flying, First Strike, and Haste. Again, don't overlook the power of Haste. If we manage to get a soupy 7/7 commander onto the battlefield that's hasty, that's already 1/3 of what we need to kill someone. Carvanista, Loyal Lupari, and Enray's Forerunners also provide haste along with Vigilance and Trample. Keep in mind that the deck is able to run a bit of redundancy for some combinations of keywords, so if you had multiples of these in hand, only discard one of them since you won't get extra keyword counters for repeated keywords. The Boar's ETB ability is also amazing for when we mass reanimate our graveyard, but we'll see those strategies soon. Speaking of redundancy, Wilson Refined Grizzly, Weathered Sentinels, Ramen-Up Hydra, and Elder Gargaroth are all sources of Vigilance, Reach, and Trample. Unfortunately, we don't get the Ward from Wilson, but fortunately, we don't get the Defender from the Sentinels. Again, as previously mentioned, if you have multiple of these in hand, discarding the worst one to get the 3-word counters. Venom Thorpe and Nightveil Predator are some more important ones since they give Flying Death Touch and Hexproof, emphasis on the Hexproof. Short of mass negative toughness effects, mass tuck effects, mass bounce effects, mass phasing out effects, or mass exile effects, if our commander has both a Hexproof and indestructible counter on it, it's going to be very difficult to deal with. Nighthawk Scavenger and Vampire Nighthawk also give Flying and Death Touch, but add Lifelink instead of Hexproof. Lifelink is very important in Voltron decks since you need to be able to buffer facing against Horde decks since you'll be on the receiving end of an army. Hopefully you're able to kill off that player before they kill you off, especially if your commander has the necessary evasion. The last of these subset of creatures, Questing Beast, Vengeful Reaper, Spirit of the Night, and Triplicate Titan, are currently the only sources for the respective keyword combinations in this color identity combination as of the recording of this video. As previously mentioned, Spirit of the Night does not have First Strike, it gains First Strike when declared as an attacker, so discarding it will not give a First Strike keyword counter to Indominus Rex. That being said, as a creature this is absolutely busted if you get into play. Now we can finally see the best keyword soup creature in the deck, Scavenge Brawler. This will give a Flying, Vigilance, Trample, and Lifelink for a total of 4 keyword counters when discarded. If that wasn't enough, we can pay 5 and exile it from our graveyard to give those same 4 counters along with 4+1/+1 counters to a target creature. Its only downside being a sorcery speed activation, but if we needed to, we have it at the ready to give those same counters once again. As for the spicy tech for the deck, keep in mind that our commander's card draw ability comes from entering the battlefield, so running things like Panharmonicon, Virtue of Knowledge, and Yarok the Desecrated will have us get double the cards. Keep in mind that these will not double the counters placed on it, since that happens as it enters the battlefield, not when it enters the battlefield. If that's what we wanted, then we need something like Winding Constrictor. This will give an extra counter of each type when something would get it. If we control this before our commander entered the battlefield, then it will enter with an extra counter of whatever it would enter with. Granted, 2 lifelink counters, 2 flying counters, 2 menace counters, etc. are redundant for the function of the keyword. However, they matter for the card drawing ability since it doesn't care if the counters are redundant or not. It just cares about how many counters it has, full stop. Now you might be saying, but DK, that's not really that spicy. Fair, how about abusing the as it enters the battlefield ability as well as the when it enters the battlefield ability. Thassa Deep Dwelling and Conjurer's Closet allows us to blink our commander at the beginning of our end step. Blinking our commander has it enter the battlefield from exile. In a sense, we're able to reset it to whatever we have new in our hand. So as it enters the battlefield from exile, we can exile a new group of creature cards from our hand, giving it new keyword counters. Then when it enters the battlefield, we'll draw that many cards. Blinking our commander is thus a very strong strategy if we want to change our keywords up, as well as drawing more cards. Speaking of drawing cards and counters, the deck is running the One Ring. This card is absolutely busted, and even more so here when our commander has lifelink. The amount of cards this can draw us while we buffer the life loss is insane. As a bonus, it's indestructible and gives us protection from everything when we cast it, so it also helps us survive a whole turn around the table when facing Horde decks. Library of Leng is included not just as a way to get a limitless hand size due to our commander and the One Ring, but it also has a spicy ability with the deck. Whenever we discard a card due to an effect, not a cost, we can top deck any number of those cards instead. Since our commander's ability has us discard cards as part of its effect and not as a cost to play the effect, we can top deck whatever we discarded. This might seem like we're tempoing ourselves, but if we discarded a good creature card with good keyword counters, we could just top deck that one in order to draw back into it, like a creature with hexproof or indestructible. This isn't the only card with the limitless hand size effect either. The deck is also running Reliquary Tower, Thought Vessel, and Decanter of Endless Water. These are obvious includes because of how many cards our commander has the potential of drawing us whenever it enters the battlefield. That and the 2 mana rocks are helpful mana acceleration, with the only other mana rock in the deck being Sol Ring. Yet, since the deck has access to green, these are the only mana rocks in it, with the rest of the mana acceleration provided by land-based ramp from Farseek, Nature's Lore, 3 visits into the north, and Rampant Growth. While I'm not too keen on the 3 CMC mana rocks are all bad argument, you can't go wrong with the all 2 CMC land-based ramp sorceries though, so definitely run these. Going back to drawing cards, the deck is still running other card advantage enchantments like Black Market Connections and Phyrexian Arena. Drawing an extra card each turn at the cost of 1 life is nothing when our commander is a 6/6 with a lifelink counter. As a bonus, we can get a treasure and or trump blocker from Black Market Connections. To be fair, the deck doesn't need a lot of additional card draw support since our commander has the potential of drawing so many cards when it enters the battlefield. Going back to the deck's spicy tech, Bone Miser is amazing here. Horde decks can be a thorn in the Voltron deck side, but each time we discard a creature as our commander enters the battlefield, we get a 2/2 zombie for blocking. We're probably not going to trigger its other 2 abilities, but the first one's good enough to include this, especially since it requires absolutely no mana to pull off. Archfiend of Ifnir is some more spicy tech since this helps us get rid of creatures as our commander enters the battlefield. Whenever we discard a handful of creatures, we're giving that much negative power toughness to our opponent's whole board, potentially killing off everything except our things. If that weren't enough, it's still a 5/4 flyer in a pinch. Obscuring Haze is also included to help us against a Fatal Alpha Strike, but this being an instant means that it's a one-time use only deal. Fortunately, we're able to cast it for free if we control our commander. However, perhaps the best way of dealing against hordes is with an army of our own. Rise of the Dark Realms will reanimate every creature from every graveyard and put them onto our battlefield. All those beefy keyword soup creatures we discarded for our commander, they're back, baby. Any creature our opponents lost over the course of the game is just icing on the cake. But that's not really that spicy. Soulquake is some spicy tech. Not only does this function as a way of getting all of our creatures back into our hand from our graveyard, but it also bounces all creatures too. So it's recovery for us and a board wipe against opponents. Sure, it also bounces our commander back into our hand, but guess what? We also have all previously discarded creatures there too, ready to soup it up again. This card is so good with Indominus Rex Alpha. Phyrexian Reclamation and Volrath Stronghold are some more ways of recovering creatures, but not en masse like Soulquake. That being said, there are still great ways of recovering a creature with spicy keyword soup if we needed to, with the land not even taking up a slot in the deck. If the black bordered one is too expensive, fortunately the gold bordered one is affordable. Elixir of Immortality also recovers things but by shuffling our graveyard into our library. While this deck is not a reanimator deck, having our graveyard be exiled is a bummer if we're planning on reanimating everything with a future Rise of the Dark Realms. Also, it helps us somewhat not deck ourselves if we're refilling up our library. Mystic Sanctuary is another recovery land like Volrath Stronghold, but for instants and sorceries and only if it enters untapped. This is used more for recovering the interaction of the deck, which we'll see in a bit. But it's worth mentioning since the deck plays a lot with what we're discarding, recovering, etc. And we can even do it at instant speed thanks to the fetch lands in the deck. Granted, only half of these will get Mystic Sanctuary into play at instant speed, preferably in response to drawing a card, but you know what I mean. Getting back either Fierce Guardianship, an offer you can't refuse, Swan Song, Negate, Mana Drain, or Counterspell is amazing since we don't really need to keep up these counterspells for anything except Mass Exile, Mass Bounce, Mass Negative Toughness, Mass Sacrifice, Mass Tuck, or Mass Phasing Out effects. While those tend to be few and far between, we will more than likely always have one in hand. However, if we don't, getting them back is crucial. Same with Beast Within and Cyclonic Rift. Especially Cyclonic Rift, since this helps us against any hordes trying to kill us off. The Ozolith is the final recovery piece of the deck and possibly the best one. It doesn't care how or why a creature left the battlefield. If it left with any counters, we put those counters onto the Ozolith. This is absolutely busted when we're blinking our commander already having a ton of keyword and or +1/+1 counters on it. Because then they go to the Ozolith. We can then shift them to another creature or back onto our commander if there was nothing else in hand to discard as it enters the battlefield. Your imagination is the limit with how you use this. The rest of the deck is just the rest of the lands. The deck's running all 3 Shock lands, all 3 Snow Duels, all 3 Slow Duels, Zagoth Triumph, Command Tower, and Ancient Tomb, as well as 2 of each basic snow-covered land for the basic land ramp effects and Into the North. As with all of my deck techs, you can build your mana base according to your budget. Whether you include more expensive cards or even cheaper cards is up to you. You do you. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Indominus Rex Alpha. While the deck is relatively simple to pilot, I love that it still has some spicy interactions and maneuvers that make it slightly more complex than a soup up a Voltron commander at Hen Hut. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons of the Brewers for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. I also want to thank any channel members. Your membership is greatly appreciated. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am the Darren Kirby, and happy brewing.